"I can't cook or sew," she said. The Mafia boss smiled. "I need a wife, not a servant." The 5 o'clock morning alarm was a razor blade against Ellie Marino's sanity. At 25, she didn't live, she accumulated hours. The chill of the South Philly pre-dawn seeped through the cracked glass of her tiny apartment window, a cold that settled deep in her bones, one that cheap space heaters could never touch. This was her life. 4 a.m. to 7 a.m. at the Greasy Spoon Diner, smelling of stale coffee and sausage. 8 a.m. to noon cleaning vacant office buildings, the scent of industrial bleach stinging her nose, a precious, terrifying 4-hour break where she tried to sleep, and then the 4 p.m. to midnight shift, pulling taps at a neighborhood dive bar where the tips barely covered the bus fare. 3 jobs, 3 rosters, 3 different types of exhaustion. And then there was Varney. Her phone buzzed on the chipped laminate counter. She didn't need to look. It was him. Mr. Varney, her landlord, a man whose floral print shirt strained against a belly that suggested he ate well, while she lived on burnt toast and customer rejects. "Rent's late. Ellie girl." His messages always started that way, followed, inevitably, by the alternative. "We can work something out. Come see me. Apartment 1. A shudder racked her. It was a constant, simmering threat that left her skin crawling. He wanted her rent in trade, and his advances had grown more aggressive, his hand brushing her lower back in the hallway, his eyes lingering too long. She'd been fending him off for months, but her excuses were wearing thin, and the eviction notice taped to her door this morning, a bright, glaring pink, proved her time was up. She was drowning. Foster care had taught her to survive, to make herself small, to expect nothing. But it hadn't prepared her for this slow, grinding erosion of dignity. Desperate, she scrolled through the online job listings during her 15-minute break at the cleaning gig, sitting on an upturned bucket in a service closet, the usual. Data entry requiring degrees she didn't have, retail positions paying minimum wage, and then one listing stuck out. It was anonymous, hidden behind a privacy wall. Private assistant, confidential. Must handle high-stress environments and maintain absolute discretion. Errands, scheduling, and logistics management. High compensation, immediate start. It was a long shot. It was probably a scam. But high compensation screamed at her. It was the difference between a roof and the street. It was the only option she had left. She typed out a sparse, honest application on her cracked phone screen. "I am a hard worker. I am discreet. I need this job." She hit send, expecting nothing. An hour later, her phone rang, a clipped male voice. "Miss Marino, we received your application. Be at the corner of Broad and Tasker tomorrow at 9 a.m. A black Escalade will retrieve you. Do not be late." The line clicked dead. No questions. No. "Do you have transportation?" Just a command. The next morning, Ellie stood on the designated corner, her hands shoved deep into the pockets of her thin jacket. She'd called out sick from the cleaning job, a risk that made her stomach turn. At 9 a.m. on the dot, a vehicle so black it seemed to absorb the weak morning light glided to the curb. The tinted window lowered halfway, revealing a man in a dark suit with an earpiece. "Ellie Marino." It wasn't a question, she nodded, her throat dry. "Get in." The door opened automatically. The inside was silent, opulent, and smelled of new leather and something vaguely spicy. She sank into the seat, feeling grime on her worn jeans. The driver didn't speak. The SUV moved smoothly, pulling away from the city's grit, past the suburbs, and into the winding, wooded roads of the countryside she never knew existed so close to the city. After 45 minutes, they passed through a set of massive iron gates, manned by guards who looked less like security and more like soldiers. The driveway was long, ending at a mansion that wasn't just big, it was a fortress of stone, glass, and immaculate landscaping. She was led through a marble foyer, her sneakers squeaking shamefully on the polished floor. 2 more bodyguards, built like refrigerators, flanked a massive oak door. One of them opened it and motioned her inside. The room was a study, dark wood, shelves lined with books that looked too old to read, and a desk the size of her entire apartment. Behind it sat the boss. He wasn't what she expected. He was young, relatively, perhaps 38. He wore a perfectly tailored gray suit, no tie, the top button of his crisp white shirt undone. His black hair was meticulously cut, but it was his eyes that held her. They were dark, assessing, and utterly calm. There was no wasted movement, no nervous energy, just a deep, profound stillness that was more intimidating than any shouting could ever be. "Luca Bellante," he said. His voice was quiet, a low rumble that filled the silence. He held her application, the one she'd typed on her phone, in his hand. It looked ridiculous. A single, flimsy piece of paper in that massive room. "You have no experience as an assistant," he stated. "No, sir. You have 3 jobs." "Yes, sir." "Why?" Ellie swallowed. The honesty that had gotten her this far was the only tool she had. "Because I need to eat, and I need to pay rent, and I'm failing at both." He watched her, his head tilted slightly. He wasn't judging her. He was reading her, like she was one of those ancient books on his shelves. "You said you are discreet, Miss Marino." "What does that mean to you?" "It means I keep my mouth shut," she said, the words coming out sharper than she intended. "It means I see what I'm paid to see and nothing else. I learned young how to be invisible." A flicker of something, not approval, maybe just recognition, passed through his dark eyes. He stood, and the sheer power of his presence made the room shrink. He was tall, solid, and moved with a predator's grace. "You will manage my personal schedule," he said, walking to the window that overlooked the grounds. "You will handle deliveries that arrive here. You will run errands. They will be simple errands, but they must be done precisely. You will report only to me. You will live here. The pay is $5,000 a week." Ellie's breath hitched. 5,000 a week. That was more than she made in 6 months. It was a mistake. It was a trap. What kind of deliveries? Luca turned. That calm, assessing gaze pinned her to the spot. "The kind you do not ask questions about." She should have run. Any sane person would have run. But she saw the eviction notice. She felt Varney's greasy touch. This mansion, these bodyguards, this terrifyingly calm man. It was just another cage, but at least it was a gilded one. "I'll take it," she said. The first day was a blur of disorientation. She was given a room, a suite, really larger than her entire apartment building floor. It had its own bathroom with a tub she could drown in. A quiet, older woman named Sophia, the housekeeper, brought her a rack of clothes. Simple, dark pants, silk blouses, soft sweaters. "Mister?" Bellante ordered them, Sophia said, her eyes kind but distant, as if she, too, had learned to be invisible. Ellie learned the rules quickly. Don't speak to the guards. Don't wander into the West Wing. Don't answer Mister. Bellante's private line. Her job was strange. She was, as promised, handling a schedule. But the appointments were cryptic. Meeting with the butcher. Pick up at Dock 9. Dinner with the old man. She learned that people feared Luca Bellante. When he entered a room, the staff didn't just stand straighter. They seemed to stop breathing. His phone calls, which she sometimes overheard from her desk outside his study, were terrifying in their brevity. "It's handled," he'd say. Or, "Make him understand the cost of disrespect." She wasn't stupid. This was not a tech billionaire. This was not a hedge fund manager. This was something dangerous. On her third day, she was organizing receipts in the study while Luca took a call across the hall. He'd left the door slightly ajar. She wasn't trying to listen, but the voice that filtered through was sharp with panic. "They hit the shipment. Luca, the Sorrentinos took the whole container." Luca's voice, in contrast, was ice cold. Who was the driver? Benny, but Luca, it wasn't his fault. "I don't care about fault," Luca interrupted. "I care about loyalty. Find Benny, find his family. I want this message sent by sundown. No one steals from me. No one." Ellie's blood turned to ice. "Find his family." She dropped the pen. The small sound echoed in the silence. She backed away from the desk, her heart hammering against her ribs. This wasn't just dangerous. This was blood. This was the Mafia Philly was full of stories, whispers of the families that still ran the docks and the unions. She had just walked into the lion's den. She didn't grab her new clothes. She grabbed the small, worn backpack she'd arrived with, shoving her old sneakers on. She made it to the foyer, her hands shaking so badly she could barely turn the knob of the massive front door. "Leaving so soon. Miss Marino?" His voice cut through her panic like a knife. She turned slowly. Luca stood at the top of the grand staircase, looking down at her. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even surprised. He was just watching. "I can't," she whispered, her voice trembling. I heard the man on the phone. The driver." He descended the stairs, one deliberate step at a time, his hands in his pockets. He stopped a few feet from her, close enough that she could smell that faint, spicy scent again. "And what did you hear?" he asked gently. "You're going to hurt his family." "No," Luca said simply. "I am going to move his family to a new house, far away, where the Sorrentinos cannot find them to silence them." Benny, however, was compromised. He made a mistake. He will pay for it. "I protect what is mine. Ellie, those who are loyal, those who are not." She stared at him, trying to see the lie. She couldn't find it, but it didn't matter. The casual way he spoke of a man paying for a mistake. "I'm not built for this," she said, tears of frustration stinging her eyes. "I just wanted to pay my rent." "You are built for survival," he countered, his voice soft. "I saw it the moment you walked in. You are a survivor. This world," he gestured around the opulent hall, "is about survival. I want to leave." "You can," he said. He didn't move to block her. "You can go back to your 3 jobs. And your landlord." She flinched, and he saw it. He knew. He'd had her investigated. "Or," he continued, stepping just a fraction closer, "you can stay. Double the pay. $10,000 a week. You do your job. You keep your eyes down, and you are safer here with me than you have ever been in your entire life." $10,000. It was an impossible number. It was freedom. It was a prison. Ellie looked at the door, then back at him. She needed a guarantee. "I stay," she said, her voice shaking but finding its steel. "As your assistant, that is all. No. Physical expectations, no emotional ones. I am your employee." Luca's dark eyes roamed her face, lingering on her mouth for a heartbeat too long. A slow, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his lips. "You have my word, Ellie. I do not want an employee who is afraid of me. I want one who is smart enough to understand the rules." He tilted his head. "But my eyes will linger. I am, after all, only a man." She stayed. 2 weeks passed. Ellie fell into a strange routine. She managed Luca's schedule, fielded deliveries, and learned to read the moods of the men who came and went. She learned that Luca was ruthless in business, but fair. He was protective of his staff. He was also profoundly alone. She hadn't heard from Varney. She assumed Luca had handled it. Her old life felt like a distant, painful dream. One night, she was in the main kitchen, long after the chef and staff had gone home. She was only there for a glass of water, but her phone had rung. It was her old neighbor from the apartment building. "Ellie, honey, it's awful," the woman cried. "Varney, he went nuts. He threw all your stuff on the curb. The police were here. He was screaming that you owed him." Ellie sank against the cold, marble countertop, the phone sliding from her hand. It wasn't much, a few worn-out sweaters, a framed photo of her and the only kind foster mother she'd ever had, a woman who died when Ellie was 12. It was the last link to her past, and it was gone. She didn't realize she was crying until a tear splashed onto the stone floor. She slid down the cabinet, burying her face in her hands, the sobs coming hard and silent, shaking her entire body. This was the breakdown she'd been holding back for a decade, the realization that she owned nothing, was nothing, and had nowhere to go. "Ellie," she gasped, looking up. Luca was standing in the doorway, a tumbler of amber liquid in his hand. He was in a dark t-shirt and sweats, the first time she'd ever seen him in anything but a suit. The rigid control was gone. He looked tired and human. She scrambled to her feet, wiping her face. I'm sorry, Mr. Bellante. I was just... I'll go. What happened? He ignored her apology, his eyes fixed on her raw, tear-stained face. She couldn't hold it in. It just spilled out. The landlord, her things on the curb, the photo, all of it. He threw it all away, she whispered, the fight gone from her voice. It's all gone. I don't know why you even keep me here. I'm useless. Useless, he repeated, his voice dangerously soft. I can't do anything, she cried, the hysteria rising. I can't cook for you. I can't sew. I burn water. I don't know how to host parties or talk to your friends. I'm not useful. I'm just baggage from South Philly that you're paying $10,000 a week to look at. He closed the distance between them in 2 silent steps. He didn't touch her, but he stood so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. He smelled like soap and whiskey. Look at me, he commanded. She forced her eyes up, meeting his intense gaze. Do I look like I need a cook? He murmured. I have a chef. He lifted a hand, and she flinched, but he only brushed a tear from her cheek with the pad of his thumb. His touch was rough, yet incredibly gentle. I don't need a servant. Ellie. His voice dropped, becoming a low whisper that vibrated through her. I am surrounded by men who are paid to serve me, and half of them would put a bullet in my back for the right price. I need a woman who doesn't run. His thumb rested at the corner of her jaw, his dark eyes searching hers, looking for something she didn't even know she had. I need a woman, he breathed, who sees the monster and is not afraid. Their eyes locked. The air in the kitchen snapped, suddenly charged and thick. The grief was still there, but it was now tangled with something else. Something hot, dark, and terrifyingly new. The tension simmered, unspoken, burning away the space between them until all she could see was him. That night in the kitchen, the air between them had been stretched thin, vibrating with a tension that Ellie had never experienced. Luca had not kissed her. He had simply held her gaze, his thumb a warm brand against her jaw, until she was the one who finally looked away, her breath catching in her throat. Life in the mansion shifted after that. Luca, true to his word, had her old apartment's lease terminated and her landlord, Varney, handled. She didn't ask for details. She just knew the harassing texts stopped. A new wardrobe arrived, delivered in sleek, black boxes. Gone were her worn-out jeans and thin sweaters. In their place were soft cashmere, tailored trousers, silk blouses, and shoes with heels that made her feel tall and dangerously unqualified. Sophia, the housekeeper, began instructing her in the house's deeper rhythms. Mr. Bellante does not like surprises. Ellie, the older woman explained, her voice kind but firm as she showed her the silent alarm panels hidden behind portraits. You must learn to move safely. This is not just a home, it is a headquarters. Ellie learned the guards' shift patterns. She learned which hallways were always monitored and which were private. She learned that moving safely meant existing in a state of high alert, a skill foster care had already taught her, but which she now honed to a fine art. Her duties remained simple, managing a schedule that was a fortress of code words, accepting deliveries that were always heavy and never labeled, but her proximity to Luca grew. He required her to be in the study with him, even when he was taking calls, a silent witness to his empire. One afternoon, she was retrieving a file when she passed the library. The massive double doors were slightly ajar, and she heard voices, not just Luca's, but several others, low and aggravated. She knew she should walk away. It was the first rule. Don't hear what you're not meant to hear. But she froze. He's a problem, Luca, a gravelly voice said. He's been talking to the Sorrentino crew. We have a traitor. There was a heavy silence. Ellie pressed herself flat against the wall, her heart hammering. Then, Luca's voice. It was not the voice he used with her. This was the voice from the phone call, the one that had chilled her blood. It was flat, cold, and utterly final. A traitor is not a problem, Luca said, the words slicing through the silence. A traitor is a lesson. Find him. Bring him to the warehouse. I want him to look me in the eyes as I explain the price of disloyalty. His family will forget his name. He will be an example. Ellie clamped a hand over her mouth. A small, horrified sound escaped her. Inside the room, the voices stopped. Absolute silence. Ellie's blood turned to ice. She ran. She didn't care about the rules of moving safely. She fled down the hall, into her own suite, and locked the door, her back sliding down the heavy wood until she was sitting on the floor, shaking. An example. His family will forget his name. This was the reality of the man who had gently brushed a tear from her cheek. She waited all afternoon, her stomach in knots. She didn't answer the call for dinner. She sat in the dark, wondering if she could climb out the window and scale the massive perimeter wall. Just after 10, her door opened. She didn't hear a key. It just clicked, and the hinges swung open silently. Luca stood in the entryway, silhouetted by the hall light. He didn't turn on her lights. He just walked in, closing the door behind him, plunging the room back into darkness, save for the sliver of moonlight coming from her window. "You were listening," he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a fact. I was walking by," she whispered, pulling her knees to her chest. "I didn't mean to." He didn't move toward her. He stayed by the door, a tall, imposing shadow. "You heard what I said about Nico. I don't want to know his name," she cried, her voice cracking. "I don't want to know any of this." "His name was Nico," Luca said, his voice relentless. "And he was my cousin. He was my blood. And he sold me out to men who would have killed me, and then come for everyone in this house, including you." He moved then, crossing the room not in anger, but with a weary weight. He sat in the armchair opposite her, the moonlight catching the hard planes of his face. "I never wanted you involved in this, Ellie," he said, his voice softer now, tinged with a regret she'd never heard. "When I hired you, you were a solution, a distraction, someone who wasn't part of this world." "I'm not," she insisted. "I'm just the girl who answers your phone." "No," he said, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. "You're the girl who heard me sentence a man to death and didn't scream. You didn't run to the police. You ran to your room. You're frightened, but you're still here." He looked at her, his gaze so intense it felt like a physical touch. "You want to know the truth? You're the only person I trust in this entire house. My men trust my money and fear my power. You look at me like I'm a man, and you're terrified of what you see. I respect that. It's the most honest thing I've felt in a decade." She had no answer for that. They sat in silence for a long time. The incident changed things. He was still her boss, the Don of this fortress, but the pretense was gone. He was still ruthless, but she was now included in the why. A few nights later, the air was thick with humidity, a prelude to a summer storm. She couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet. She found herself on the wide stone balcony adjoining the library, a place she'd learned Luca often went to think. He was already there, leaning against the balustrade, a glass of wine in his hand. He wasn't surprised to see her. "Can't sleep?" he asked, not looking at her, just staring out at the dark, sprawling grounds. "Too quiet," she said, wrapping her arms around herself. He was silent for a moment, then turned to her. "You told me you learned to be invisible. Who taught you?" The question was so direct, so personal. It caught her off guard. The night was dark. The air was close. It felt like a confessional. "Everyone," she said, her voice small. "The system. You learn fast that the quiet kids get moved less. The invisible ones don't get hit as often. You just disappear. You find a closet or the space under the stairs." She hadn't meant to say that much. It just came out. "How many homes?" he asked. "I lost count," she admitted, a bitter laugh escaping her. 6, 7, after my best foster mom died. It all just blurred together. You just survive until you're 18. Then they kick you out and you survive on your own." Luca was watching her, his face unreadable in the shadows. He set his wine glass down. "I was in a home once," he said. Ellie stared. "What?" "My father's. After my mother died, he was a hard man. He didn't believe in comfort. He believed in strength. I was 8 years old. I learned to be invisible, too." but for different reasons. He stepped closer to her, and the air crackled. He was sharing a piece of himself, a currency she understood better than money. "You're not invisible anymore." "Ellie," he said, his voice a low rumble. He lifted his hand, slowly, giving her time to pull away. He didn't touch her face. He just brushed a lock of hair that the wind had loosened, tucking it behind her ear. His fingers were warm, his touch calloused but impossibly gentle. "I see you," he whispered. He cupped her cheek, his thumb stroking the bone. Her breath hitched. Her entire world narrowed to the space between them, the smell of his wine, the warmth of his skin. He leaned in. His eyes dropped to her lips. She could feel his breath. It was going to happen. It was happening. And she panicked. It was too much. This man who ordered deaths, this man who was her boss, this man who saw her. She jerked back, pulling away from his touch as if she'd been burned. "I'm sorry," she stammered. I can't. I'm tired. Good night." She fled. She didn't look back to see the look on his face. For 3 days, the tension was unbearable. Luca was polite. He was professional. He was distant. The warmth was gone, replaced by the cool, calculating boss. Ellie hated it. She felt she had failed some crucial test. On the 3rd night, she was in her room trying to read a book, but the words just swam. It was late, past 2 in the morning. The house was settled, the guards on their midnight rotation. A noise. She sat bolt upright. It wasn't a house noise. It was a scrape. Metal on stone. She crept to her window, which overlooked a side terrace, 2 floors below, and she saw him. A man, dressed in black, moving low and fast along the foundation. He wasn't one of Luca's. He was moving toward the east wing, toward Luca's study, and the stairs that led to his private quarters. She didn't think. She didn't scream. She lunged across her room, slammed her palm against the silent alarm panel Sophia had shown her, and held it there. The house exploded, not with noise, but with light. Red lights flashed in the hallway. Her door burst open, but it wasn't Luca. It was a guard. "Stay down, miss!" She heard shouts from outside. A single, muffled shot, then another. Then Luca was there. He stormed into her room, his gun in his hand, wearing only a pair of black sweatpants. His chest was bare, his hair a mess. He looked wild and terrified. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his eyes scanning her. "No, I saw him, outside, by the window. He was going to your study." The guard from the hallway reappeared. "Sir, we got him. One intruder, armed." He cut the perimeter wire at the south fence. Luca's eyes never left Ellie. He was breathing heavily, not from exertion, but from an adrenaline crash. He motioned to the guard. "Get out!" The guard vanished. Luca holstered his weapon at the small of his back and walked toward her. He reached out and grabbed her arm, not gently, and pulled her against him. He just held her, his face buried in her hair, his heart hammering against her chest. "He was coming for me," Luca said, his voice rough. "The alarm in your room. It lit up his exact position. You saved my life. Ellie." He pulled back, his hands gripping her shoulders. He was rattled. The calm, controlled dawn was gone. He would have had to pass your room to get to mine. They knew where you were. The thought sent a new wave of terror through her. "You're not staying here," he said, his voice suddenly hard. He grabbed her hand and pulled her out of the room, down the hall, past his study, and up a private staircase she'd never seen. He opened a door into his personal bedroom. It was massive, dark, and dominated by a huge bed. The windows were reinforced steel. "You sleep here," he commanded. "From now on, where I can see you." "Luca, Don't argue with me," he roared, and she flinched. He saw it, and his face softened instantly. He raked a hand through his hair. "I'm sorry. I am not angry at you, but this changes things. You are not safe in that room. You will stay here. I will sleep on the couch." He gestured to a leather couch in the corner. The sexual tension in the room was so thick it was suffocating. It wasn't just desire, it was fear, relief, and a raw, possessive energy she'd never felt from him. She was his assistant, his confidant, and now, his charge. She spent the night in his bed, under his sheets, smelling his scent, while he sat in the dark on the couch, watching the door. The nightmares came just before dawn, not of the intruder, but of Varney, of hands grabbing her, of being thrown out, of being worthless. She woke up with a strangled gasp, sitting up, her body slick with sweat. In an instant, he was there, sitting on the edge of the bed. "You're safe," he said, his voice a low, comforting rumble in the darkness. "It was a dream." "I'm sorry," she whispered, shaking. "I'm so sorry." "Stop apologizing," he said softly. He didn't move away. He tentatively rested a hand on her back, rubbing slow, warm circles. The simple, non-sexual touch was her undoing. She leaned into it, desperate for the comfort. He shifted, sitting more fully on the bed, pulling her back against his chest, her head resting on his shoulder. He was so warm, so solid. He was the fortress. "You're safe," he whispered again, his lips brushing her hair. They sat like that for minutes. Her trembling slowed, her breathing evened out, matching his. His hand was still on her back, his thumb now stroking her shoulder blade. She turned her head, her cheek resting against the hard muscle of his chest. She looked up at him. He was looking down at her, his dark eyes searching her face. The air shifted. The comfort became something else, something hot. He lowered his head. "Ellie," he whispered. It was a warning, a question. This time, she didn't pull away. He kissed her. It was soft. It was a test. His lips were firm, warm, and questioning. He was giving her every chance to say no. She didn't. She made a small sound in the back of her throat, and her hand, which had been resting on his arm, curled, gripping his bicep. That was all he needed. The kiss deepened, and he tilted his head, his other hand coming up to cup her jaw, holding her steady. It was a kiss of gratitude, of fear, of a loneliness so profound she recognized it as her own. She trembled, not from fear this time, but from a wave of feeling so intense it threatened to drown her. He broke the kiss. He pulled back, his breathing ragged, his forehead resting against hers. His eyes were closed. "You don't owe me anything," he rasped, his voice thick. "Not for this, not for the job, not for saving your life. You owe me nothing, Ellie." He was giving her the out she had taken on the balcony. She opened her eyes. She looked at this complicated, dangerous, gentle man, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't surviving. She was choosing. She brought her hand up, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. He was real. This was real. "I know," she whispered, her voice clear in the pre-dawn quiet. "That's why I wanna—" His eyes snapped open. The control he held so tightly. Shattered. He didn't crush her. He didn't conquer her. He simply claimed her, his mouth finding hers again in a kiss that was all at once passionate and slow, desperate and healing. He laid her back against the pillows, his body a warm, protective weight hovering over hers. His hands were reverent. He touched her face, her hair, her shoulders, as if he was memorizing her. He was watching her eyes, reading her, ensuring she was with him. And she was. For the first time, she wasn't invisible. She was seen. She arched into his touch, her own hands exploring the new, wonderful territory of his skin. It was a slow, tender discovery. This wasn't the clumsy, selfish fumbling she'd feared. It was a conversation. It was an unspoken promise. It was two broken, lonely people finding a moment of pure, honest connection in the dark. It was the healing of 1,000 tiny wounds, a quiet intimacy that was more powerful than any shouted declaration. When she woke, the sun was streaming through the armored windows. She was tangled in the sheets, his arm slung possessively over her waist. He was awake, watching her. The morning light should have brought shame or regret. It didn't. He brushed the hair from her face, his expression serious, the lines around his eyes soft. "You're not my staff anymore," he said. It wasn't a question, it was a statement, a new rule, a new reality. That morning, Luca's declaration, "You're not my staff anymore," hung in the air, a definitive line drawn in the sand. It changed everything and, in practice, changed nothing. She was still in his house, still in his world, but the invisible barrier between employer and employee had evaporated, replaced by a raw, undefined intimacy. He was still Luca Bellante, the Don. He still took calls that made her skin crawl, and he still commanded his men with a terrifying, quiet authority. But he was also just Luca. The man who, she learned, preferred his coffee black and scalding, who had a scar above his left hip that he refused to explain, and who watched her, when he thought she wasn't looking, with an intensity that made her feel like the only person in the world. Her role, once confined to schedules and deliveries, expanded. He stopped shielding her from the truth of his operations. "I need you to read this," he'd say, handing her a message, not a typed report, but a cryptic, handwritten note. "Tell me what you feel." At first, she was confused. "It just says the shipment is delayed, the fish are spoiled." "Read it again," he'd insist, his hand on her back, his chin grazing her hair. "Feel the words. Who is it from?" And she would, her intuition, sharpened by years of surviving predators, kicking in. This word, spoiled, it's angry. It's not a report. It's an insult. The sender is blaming you, not the process. Luca would nod, a dark satisfaction in his eyes. "Good. You see what my men, who are trained to see everything, miss. You see the person." He began taking her with him, not to the docks, not to the warehouses, but to the other side of his world. He was a major benefactor to a city hospital, a fact the public knew well. He attended a charity gala, a sterile, high society event, and he took her as his date. She wore a backless, emerald green dress that he had chosen. It had cost more than she used to make in a year. As she walked into the ballroom on his arm, 1,000 eyes turned to them. The whispers were immediate. "Who is she?" "Hold your head high," Luca had murmured in her ear as they entered, his hand resting possessively on the bare skin of her lower back. "You are with me." She realized, very quickly, that this was not a date. It was a performance. He was parading her. His men were on high alert, the tension in the organization simmering. The Sorrentinos, the rival family he'd mentioned, were making moves, and someone inside Luca's own ranks was feeding them information. There was a leak, a traitor, and it was driving him to the edge. By keeping Ellie so close, he was sending a message. "I am confident, I am untouchable. I am strong enough to be seen with a woman I am not hiding." But to Ellie, it felt different. She felt like a pawn, a beautiful, well-dressed, terrified pawn in a war she didn't understand. She smiled when he told her to smile. She nodded politely at politicians who were clearly on his payroll, and all the while, she felt the weight of his men watching them, and the unseen threat of his enemies. Later that night, back in the safety of his study, she confronted him. "You used me," she said, not with anger, but with a flat, tired certainty. Luca loosened his tie, his eyes heavy. "I protected you. By showing them you are mine, I made you untouchable." "You made me a target," she countered, her voice shaking. "You painted a bullseye on my back and called it a dress." He crossed the room, his movements weary. He didn't argue. He just pulled her against him, burying his face in her hair. "You're right," he admitted, his voice muffled. "It was both. It was the only way I knew how to do both at once." His honesty disarmed her. She leaned into him, her anger dissolving, replaced by the familiar, frightening pull toward this complicated man. The leak wasn't found. The tension in the house grew thick, a layer of damp, suffocating wool. Luca was wound tight, sleeping less, his temper short with his men, though never with her, one evening. She found him in his study, not working, but staring at a blank piece of heavy, cream-colored stationery. A single, expensive-looking fountain pen sat beside it. "What are you doing?" she asked softly. He looked up, his eyes clouded. "Tomorrow is my mother's birthday. She died 12 years ago. I always write her a letter. I burn it. It's a tradition." "That's beautiful, Luca." He gave a harsh, short laugh. "It's stupid, and I don't have the words this year. Everything is noise." Ellie walked over, standing behind his chair. She rested her hands on his shoulders, feeling the knots of tension. "Then just talk," she whispered. "Tell me." What do you want to say to her? He closed his eyes, leaning back into her touch. I want to say I'm tired. Mama, I'm so tired of this. They gave me this crown. I never asked for it. I'm not my father. I'm not my brother. I'm just the one who is left. His voice was raw, stripped of all the command, all the power. This was the boy from the hard home, the one who had learned to be invisible. I have this house, and all this money, and all this respect, he continued, his voice cracking, and I am so alone. A tear slipped from his eye. He didn't move to wipe it. Ellie's own heart broke. She moved around the desk, kneeling beside his chair, and took his hand. It was the first time she had initiated the contact, the first time she was the one offering comfort. Write that, she said, her voice thick. Tell her you're not alone anymore. He looked at her, his dark eyes wrecked and vulnerable. He picked up the pen, and as he wrote, she stayed there, a silent anchor, her hand covering his. Through the letter, she saw him, not the Don, not the boss, just Luca, a lonely man who missed his mother. The next day, the vulnerability was gone, replaced by a grim resolve. The Sorrentinos had made another move, this one closer to home. A shipment had been hit, but it felt like a test. They're getting bolder, he said, the ice back in his voice. He found her in the library. The leak is bad. Ellie was pacing, her fear a cold knot in her stomach. I hate this, she said. I hate feeling helpless. If they come here, They won't, he said. You don't know that. You told me that man, Nico, was your blood. You don't know who to trust. What if they get past your men? What am I supposed to do? Hit them with a book? He watched her, a new, calculating look in his eyes. No, he said slowly. You're right. He took her hand. Come with me. He led her not to the kitchen or the study, but down to the reinforced basement, to a room she'd never seen. It was a shooting range, clean, soundproofed, and lined with an arsenal of weapons that made her stomach turn. He picked up a small, sleek, black handgun. This is a Sig Sauer. It's light. The recoil is manageable. It will be yours. Luca, I've never held a gun. I know, he said. He stood behind her, his body pressing against her back. He put the gun in her hand, his own hand covering hers, shaping her fingers. I'm gonna teach you. Her hand was trembling. The metal was cold and heavy. This is not a toy, he whispered in her ear, his breath warm. This is a tool. It is the only thing in this world that makes a weak person equal to a strong one, and I will not have you be weak. His arms were around her, his left hand on her waist, pulling her flush against his solid chest, his right hand over hers, holding the gun. He was teaching her, but it was the most intimate embrace they had ever shared. Breathe, he murmured. Stand steady. Don't fight it. Feel the weight. She could feel his heart beating against her back. She could feel the hard muscle of his arms, the solid wall of his chest. The tension in the room was a living thing, the cold, deadly purpose of the gun, and the hot, protective possession of the man holding her. Squeeze, he said. Don't pull, just squeeze. She did. The explosion was deafening. Even with the ear protectors, the gun jumped, but he held her steady. A hole appeared in the center of the paper target. She was shaking, the adrenaline so potent it made her dizzy. He took the gun from her, his movements economical, and turned her in his arms. He was looking at her, not with pride, but with a fierce, dark hunger. You are a survivor, Ellie, he said, his voice rough. You're a natural. He hadn't kissed her, but she felt kissed. She felt claimed. That night, the tension finally broke. A phone call. She heard him shouting from the study. It wasn't his usual cold command. It was raw, furious. She found him standing by the window, the phone crushed in his hand. What is it? My uncle, he spat. My capo. He thinks he runs my life. He's demanding I make a peace. A peace? With the Sorrentinos? A marriage, Luca said, his voice dripping with venom. He wants me to marry Angelina Sorrentino, their youngest daughter, to solidify the alliance and stop the bleeding. Ellie's stomach dropped. It made a cold, horrible sense. In his world, that's what you did. You used marriage as a treaty. He thinks, Luca continued, turning to her, his eyes blazing, that a wife will make me look strong, stable, that this distraction, he gestured to her, is making me look weak. Ellie's defenses, the ones she had built since she was a child, slammed into place. She wrapped her arms around herself. Maybe he's right, she said, her voice sounding small, distant. What? Maybe you should, she said, unable to look at him. It's smart. It would stop the war. It's what a man in your position does. Why won't you just marry someone who fits the role? Someone who knows how to be a Mafia wife? Luca stared at her, his fury evaporating, replaced by a disbelief so profound it silenced her. Someone who fits the role? He repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. He crossed the room, stalking her as she backed away until her back hit the bookshelf. He planted his hands on either side of her head, trapping her. He was close. Close enough for her to see the storm in his eyes. You think I want one of them? He whispered, his voice a raw grate. You think I want some trained, empty-headed doll who was raised to pour coffee and look the other way? A woman who will smile at me in public and sleep with my cousin in private? Luca, they look at me, he snarled, and they see the power. They see the money. They see the dawn. And they are either terrified or they are aroused by it. But they never see me. He leaned closer, his forehead almost touching hers. His voice broke, the raw vulnerability from the letter returning. But this time it was laced with a desperate, protective anger. Because none of them, he breathed, none of them look at me like you do when I'm broken. That was it. That was the truth. It shattered her defenses. She let out a sob she didn't know she was holding. Luca, she whispered. His mouth crashed down on hers. It was not the gentle exploration of their first night. It was not the tender comfort of the study. This was a claiming. It was a desperate, raw, hungry kiss that was more than desire. It was possession. It was belonging. He kissed her like he was starving, like he was drowning and she was his only air. His hands were in her hair, tilting her head back. Her hands were on his chest, fisting in his shirt. He lifted her, and she wrapped her legs around his waist as he carried her, never breaking the kiss, from the study to his bedroom. He laid her on the bed, his body following hers down. Their lovemaking that night was a storm. It was slow and violent all at once. It was a silent, desperate conversation. His touches were not just passionate, they were reverent. He kissed her mouth, her jaw, her throat, the scar on her shoulder from a childhood fall, as if he was memorizing every part of her, branding her as his, and she, in turn, clung to him, meeting his intensity with her own. She was no longer a pawn. She was no longer staff. She was his. He was hers. In the dark, with the war raging outside, they had found their own, separate, desperate peace. It was a slow, deep, emotional claiming that went beyond the physical. It was two souls, raw and exposed, clinging to each other in the dark. She woke up the next morning, wrapped in his arms, his breathing even against her ear. She felt safe. It was a foreign, terrifying, and addictive feeling. He was quiet all morning, thoughtful. He watched her as she drank her coffee, his gaze so heavy she could feel it. Finally, in the middle of the afternoon, he found her on the balcony, the place where she had first pulled away from him. He stood in front of her. He didn't touch her. He just looked at her, his face serious. "Marry me, Ellie," he said. Her heart stopped. What did you say?" "Marry me," he repeated, his voice firm. "My uncle is right about one thing. I need a wife. It'll show stability. It'll show strength, and it'll protect you. As my wife, no one can touch you. You will be me. An attack on you is an attack on me." Ellie's head was spinning. This wasn't a proposal. This was a business merger, a strategy. "Luca, you're asking me to be a shield." "No," he said, and his control finally snapped. He grabbed her hands. "I am asking you to be my wife. Yes, it It will protect you. Yes, it will send a message, but that's not why." He pulled her closer, his eyes pleading. "I'm asking because I want it. I want to wake up to you. I want to argue with you. I want you. Not Angelina Sorrentino. Not some appropriate choice. You." She was overwhelmed. She was terrified. This was insane. This was a man who had a gun range in his basement. This was a man whose uncle wanted him to trade a woman for peace. And he was the only man who had ever made her feel safe. The only man who had ever seen her. She looked at him, at his strong, worried, impatient face, and she knew her answer. "Yes," she whispered. His shoulders sagged in relief, but she held up a hand. "Yes," she said again, her voice stronger, "but on one condition. You have to know. You can't expect me to be a wife like in your world. I'm not that woman, Luca. I told you, I can't cook, I can't sew, I don't know how to do any of this." A slow smile spread across Luca's face. It was the first genuine, unguarded smile she had ever seen from him. It transformed him. He stepped forward and cupped her face, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. "Good," he said, his voice a low, warm rumble. "I don't want someone trained. I want someone real." He kissed her then, a deep, sealing promise. It wasn't the desperate kiss of the night before. It was the kiss of a beginning. The decision, once made, set off a chain reaction that Ellie could barely comprehend. Her yes was a spark, and Luca's organization was the gasoline. The house, once a silent fortress, was suddenly swarming, not with guests, but with staff. Sophia, the housekeeper, was now at the head of a small, efficient team of women who appeared with swatches of fabric, measuring tapes, and hushed, respectful voices. "Mister, Bellante has requested we handle the arrangements, Miss," Sophia said, her face impassive, though Ellie thought she saw a flicker of warmth in her eyes. "He wants the finest." The finest apparently meant a room full of dresses she was too afraid to touch, silks, satins, and antique lace. It meant jewelers arriving in armored vans, opening velvet boxes of diamonds and emeralds that cost more than the entire city block she'd grown up on. Ellie sat in the middle of it, a mannequin being dressed. She felt a profound, alienating disconnect. This was a wedding. It was supposed to be a happy, personal thing. This felt like a coronation, or an acquisition. She couldn't shake the feeling. Was she a partner, or was she the ultimate trophy, the one woman he'd chosen, not for an alliance, but for himself, which in his world was the biggest power play of all? Luca, meanwhile, was a ghost. He was there. He would kiss her, hold her at night, his touch more possessive than ever. But during the day, he was consumed. The hunt for the mole was on, and the Sorrentino threat was escalating. "What are they doing?" she asked him one night, as he stood by the window, staring into the dark, his body a rigid line of tension. "They're making noise," he said, his voice flat. "What kind of noise? You're shutting me out. Luca, I thought we were... I'm not staff, remember?" He turned, and his eyes were tired. "I'm trying to protect you. Ellie, the less you know, the safer you are." "That's not protection," she shot back, her voice rising. "That's isolation. That's what you do to a prized possession. You keep it in a box. You told me you wanted someone real. Is this real? Or am I just the girl you're hiding while you go to war?" The tension between them was a new, sharp thing. It wasn't the heat of their attraction. It was the cold friction of his world grinding against hers. He wanted to shield her. She needed to stand with him. He sighed, raking a hand through his hair. "I'm handling it. Just trust me. 2 more days. Just get through the next 2 days. Then you're my wife. Then you are untouchable." He didn't understand. She didn't want to be untouchable. She wanted to be unbreakable. The eve of the wedding, the house was finally quiet. The planners were gone. The dress, a simple, impossibly elegant column of cream-colored silk, was hanging in her closet. Luca was downstairs, in his study, in a final, tense meeting with his uncle. Ellie was in their bedroom, the massive suite she now shared with him. She felt restless, her nerves frayed raw. She went to the bed meaning to just sit, to breathe. She didn't see it at first. Her pillow was white. The object on it was not. It was a knife, a long, slender stiletto, its blade black as oil. It was pinned, blade first, deep into the high thread count Egyptian cotton. Tied to the hilt with a piece of black leather was a small, simple, wooden tag. No, not a tag. Her name, Ellie. Not written, etched, burned into the wood. Ellie didn't scream. Her foster care self, the girl who learned to be invisible, took over. All the blood rushed from her head, leaving a cold, sharp, ringing clarity. This was in the house. This was in their room. The message was not for Luca. It was for her. She didn't touch the handle. She calmly pulled the knife, with the pillow still attached, from the bed. She walked out of the room, down the grand staircase, her bare feet silent on the marble. The study doors were closed. She heard raised voices. She didn't knock. She pushed the doors open. Luca, his uncle, and his 3 top capos stopped, their heads snapping toward her. Luca's face was a mask of thunder. "Ellie, I told you I am—" he started, his voice a low growl of annoyance. And then he saw what she was holding. She said nothing. She walked to the center of the room, to the massive oak desk, and placed the pillow on it. The knife stood straight up, a dark, obscene message. "This was on my pillow," she said, her voice perfectly level. The silence that followed was absolute. Luca's uncle, a short, stocky man named Paolo, went pale. Luca stared at the knife. He didn't move for a full 5 seconds. The control in him, the icy stillness, was so profound it was terrifying. And then it broke. It was the most violent thing she had ever seen. With a roar that was pure, animalistic rage, he swept his arm across the desk. The computer, the heavy crystal decanter, the papers, all of it crashed against the far wall. "They were in my room!" he bellowed, his voice shaking the room. "In my house!" He slammed his fists on the desk, his eyes wild, and they weren't for his men. They were for her. "That's it. It's off. The wedding is off." "What?" Paolo gasped. "Luca, you can't— The disrespect." "Disrespect?" Luca laughed, a sound with no humor. He put a knife on her pillow. "Paolo, they are marking her. I'm taking her. We're going to the bunker." "No." The word was quiet, but it cut through Luca's rage like a scalpel. They all turned to her. Ellie stood, her arms at her sides. She was shaking, but her eyes were locked on Luca. "No," she said again, stronger. "You will not. That's exactly what they want. They want you to panic. They want you to run. They want you to hide me." She walked around the desk, standing in front of him, forcing him to see her. "You do this, Luca. You tell them I'm your weakness. You tell them they've won. Ellie, this is not a game." "I know it's not a game," she cried, her own control snapping. "I just had my name delivered on a knife. But I am still here, and tomorrow I am going to be your wife. If you call this off, you are the one putting the target on my back. You are telling them I am a toy you will hide. If we do this, if we stand there tomorrow, together, you are telling them I am your strength and that I am not to be touched. Now, you clean this up. I'm going to bed." She turned and walked out of the room, leaving 5 of the most powerful, dangerous men in Philadelphia staring at her in stunned silence. The wedding did not happen at the Grand Estate. Luca wasn't stupid. And he was, she learned, in awe of her. "No one has ever spoken to me like that," he had whispered later, holding her in the dark, his body a tense shield around hers. "Not even my father." The ceremony was moved to a small, fortified villa he owned deep in the countryside, a place even his uncle didn't know existed. The guest list was small. There were 10 people: Luca, Ellie, Paolo, who looked grim. Sophia, who was her witness and cried softly, the civil officiant, who looked terrified, and 5 of Luca's most trusted guards, who formed a perimeter, their eyes on the trees. Not the ceremony. Ellie wore the simple, cream-colored silk dress. She wore no veil, no diamonds. Her only jewelry was her new, heavy, platinum wedding ring. Luca wore a black suit, no tie. his hand a permanent, warm brand on her lower back. He never let her go. Not for a second. The vows were short, legal, and stripped of all poetry. Do you take this man? I do. Do you take this woman? Luca's eyes never left hers. I do, he said, his voice a low, gravelly promise. The officiant, eager to leave, pronounced them husband and wife. Luca pulled her in, and his kiss was not for show. It was a sealing, a brand. It was a promise of war and a promise of protection. You are mine, I am yours, and heaven help anyone who stands between us. Their wedding night was spent in the villa's master bedroom. It was beautiful, all stone and dark wood, with a massive fireplace. 2 guards stood outside their door. 2 more were on the terrace. The adrenaline of the past 24 hours had faded, leaving them both emotionally flayed. Ellie stood by the window, watching the moonlight on the trees. She had done it. She had married the Dawn. She was Mrs. Bellante. He came up behind her, sliding his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his solid chest. He rested his chin on her head. Wife, he murmured, his voice rough. He sounded like he was testing the word, tasting it. She turned in his arms, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. His heart was hammering, a steady, strong beat under her palm. The terror of the night, the knife, the rage. It all came rushing up. Tears welled in her eyes. Luca, she whispered, her voice choking. Hey, he said, his face instantly softening, his thumbs brushing her cheeks. It's done. You're safe. I'm not scared of them, she cried softly. I'm scared of this. Of you. His brow furrowed in confusion. Me? You look at me. No one has ever looked at me like this in my entire life. Like I matter. Like I'm precious. The word felt foreign on her tongue. I've never had a home, Luca. I've never had a family. I've never had anyone who looked at me twice. Unless they wanted something, I don't know how to be this for you. I don't know how to be a wife. He was silent for a long time, his dark eyes searching hers. He seemed to be memorizing her. You don't have to be anything, he whispered, his voice thick. You are Ellie. You are my wife. The rest, that's just noise. He bent his head and kissed her. It was not the desperate, claiming kiss of their first nights. It was not the public, sealing kiss of the ceremony. This was something new. It was slow. It was tender. It was reverence. His hands, which could be so ruthless, were impossibly gentle. He unzipped her dress, and the silk pooled at her feet. He kissed her shoulder, his lips tracing the bone. You are not glass, he murmured against her skin, but you are sacred to me. He undressed her slowly, as if unwrapping a priceless gift he was afraid to break. He kissed her hands, her wrists, the pulse at her throat. This was not about passion, not about the heat of the past. It was about connection. It was about solidifying the raw, emotional bond they had forged in chaos. He led her to the bed, and their intimacy was a quiet conversation, a series of whispered vows in the dark, a promise that in a world of violence and fear, they would be each other's home. Morning light, for the first time, Ellie woke up feeling peaceful. She was tangled in the sheets, in Luca's arms. He was still asleep, his face relaxed, the hard lines of the dawn softened. She slipped out of bed, found one of his shirts, and padded to the kitchen. She was going to make him coffee. It was a simple, wifely thing to do, and she was determined to start learning. She was fumbling with the high-tech espresso machine when he came in, his hair a mess, wearing only a pair of pants. He laughed, a real, deep, unguarded laugh. You're going to break it, he said, his voice husky with sleep. I'm trying, she said, laughing with him. It's just, I can't cook, remember? I remember, he said, coming up behind her, wrapping his arms around her, kissing her neck. It's fine. A sound, a dull, heavy thump from outside. Luca's entire body went rigid. The man who was laughing was gone. The dawn was back. Get down, he whispered, his voice ice. "What?" "Get down," he roared. He grabbed her, shoving her toward the massive carved stone kitchen island. He threw his body on top of hers, a solid, unmovable shield, just as the world dissolved into fire. The explosion was deafening. The windows of the villa, the ones on the other side of the house, shattered, but the one in the driveway, the car. It was a fireball. A wave of heat and concussive force slammed into them, rattling the stone, shaking the dust from the ceiling. Glass and debris rained down. Luca was roaring, his ears ringing. "Are you hit, Ellie? Are you hit? No, no, are you?" she screamed, buried beneath him. "I'm fine." His men were shouting outside. A firefight had broken out. "Boss, we're compromised. Sorrentino, back exit now." Luca scrambled to his feet, pulling her with him. His face was a mask of cold, controlled fury. "We're moving!" They ran, through a back pantry, down a set of stone steps, into a dark, damp tunnel. They ran for what felt like a mile, emerging into another garage, into another armored SUV, which sped away. They drove for an hour, in silence, until they arrived at a box. It was a concrete, windowless, single-story building that looked like a power station. It was a safe house, a bunker. The moment the steel door sealed behind them, Ellie started shaking. The adrenaline, the fear, it was too much. Luca was instantly at her side, his hands frantic, checking her for injuries, brushing dust from her hair. "They knew," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They knew where we were." Luca stepped back, his face a grim, dark painting of rage. "Yes, the mole. He's high up. He knew about this villa. He must have—" They were waiting. They let the wedding happen. He paced the small, concrete room. "This was a message, Ellie. They were telling me. They're telling me. They can get to you. Anytime. Anywhere." He looked broken, defeated, all his power, and he couldn't protect her. Ellie watched him, his rage, his fear, and she realized his fear was for her, the woman from South Philly, the one who ran, the one who was a victim. She was gone. In her place was Luca's wife. She took a shaky breath. She walked over to him. She grabbed his face, her hands firm, forcing his wild, dark eyes to meet hers. "I'm shaken. Luca," she said, her voice low and steady. "But I am not broken. You're wrong. They didn't tell you they can get to me. They told me they're scared of me." His eyes widened. "I don't care if I can't sew curtains," she said, her voice fierce. "I can stand by your side. So stop looking at me like I'm made of glass, and start telling me what we are going to do about it." Her words hung in the sterile, concrete air of the safe house. "Start telling me what we are going to do about it." Luca stared at her, the mask of the Dawn, the indestructible leader, cracking. He saw the soot on her cheek, the fierce, terrified loyalty in her eyes. She wasn't the girl he had hired. She was the woman who had walked into his study holding a knife, the woman who had insisted on marrying him during a war. He turned away, the vulnerability too much to bear. He paced the small, suffocating room. "You don't understand," he finally said, his voice a low grate of agony. "You don't understand what you are. To me, I'm your wife. Luca, you're my vulnerability," he shot back, spinning to face her. "You are the one single thing in this world they can use against me. The one thing that makes me weak." Ellie flinched, the word weak a slap, but he wasn't attacking her. He was confessing. He sank onto the edge of the cot, his head in his hands. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. "I had an older brother," he said, his voice muffled. "Dante, he was the heir, not me. I was the numbers guy, the quiet one. Dante was the lion. He was supposed to be the Dawn." Ellie said nothing. She just watched him, her heart aching. He was strong, charismatic, and stupid. Luca continued, his voice laced with an old, cold bitterness. He fell in love. Not a strategic marriage, just a girl, a waitress from South Philly. Sound familiar? He looked up, his eyes hollow. The Sorrentinos. They were nothing then, just a small-time crew, but they were smart. They watched him. They saw his pattern. They saw her. They didn't go after his armored car. They didn't hit his shipments. They went after his weakness. What did they do? Ellie whispered, though she was terrified to know. They used her, he said, his voice flat. They used her to get him alone. They cornered him in an alley. He died. He died in a gutter, Ellie. Not like a boss, like a dog, because he loved someone he shouldn't have. He stood up, the memory fueling a fresh, cold rage. I became boss that night. I was 28 years old, and I walked into my father's study, where his body still lay, and I swore on his grave. I swore I would never be weak. I would never have a vulnerability. I would never marry for anything but strength, which meant I would never marry at all. Because love is a target. Love is a liability. Love is how you end up in a gutter. He finally turned, his eyes locking on hers, the confession complete, and then you walk into my study with your sad eyes and your backbone of steel, and I looked at you, and I didn't care about the vow. I didn't care about the risk, and now, here we are, hiding in a concrete box, because they know you are the one thing I will not lose. Ellie processed his words, the sheer, agonizing weight of his history. He hadn't just been protecting her, he had been protecting himself from a history that was repeating itself. Blow by blow, she walked to him, not with pity, but with a cold, clear purpose. You're right, she said, her voice quiet. He frowned. What? You're right. I am your weakness. As long as I am the woman you're hiding, as long as I am the secret, I am a target. We're trapped. You're trapped. This bunker, this is you, in a gutter. Ellie, don't... So stop treating me like the weakness, she said, her voice gaining strength, and start using me as the weapon. He stared at her, confused. What are you talking about? The mole, she said, her mind racing, the plan forming from the ashes of their wedding day. He put the knife on my pillow. He knew about the villa. He's not just feeding them intel. Luca, he's obsessed with me. He thinks I'm the key to breaking you, the Sorrentinos. They think they're repeating history. They think I'm the waitress from South Philly. I will not let you... You won't let me what? She challenged him, her hands curling into fists. Sit in a box until they find a way to blow it up? We can't stay here forever. You can't run your organization from a bunker. You have to go out. You have to find him. And you can't, because you don't know who to trust. She took a deep breath and laid it all out. But I can. He'll come to me. The mole. He thinks I'm scared. He thinks I'm a victim. Let's give him what he wants. Use me as bait. No. The word was absolute. Absolutely not. I will not. I'll kill every last man in my crew before I let you stand in the line of fire. And what if he's the last man standing, she argued, her voice rising with desperate logic. What if he's your most trusted man? You're blind, Luca. You're so busy protecting your vulnerability that you can't see your enemy. He'll come to me. He wants to. He wants to be the one to deliver me to the Sorrentinos. He wants to be the one who finally breaks Luca Bellante. She grabbed his shirt, forcing him to see her, not as the woman he needed to hide, but as the partner he needed to fight with. Let me be the one who breaks him. He stared at her, his chest rising and falling. He saw the terror in her eyes, but he saw the steel underneath. He saw the survivor. He saw the woman who, just hours ago, had told him to his face that she wasn't scared. He was terrified, more terrified than he'd been the night his brother died, but he was also in awe. She wasn't Dante's waitress. She was his wife. One chance, he said, his voice raw. We do it my way. You are never, not for 1 second, out of my sight. You will wear a tracker. You will wear a wire. The second he reveals himself. The second, I move. We move. The plan is over. He won't reveal himself to you, she said. He won't have a choice, Luca said, a dark promise in his eyes, because I will be on him before he can breathe. The plan was audacious. It was insane. It was, as Luca called it, a controlled implosion. The annual charity gala for the Children's Hospital, the same one they had attended before, was in 3 days. It was the perfect neutral ground, public, crowded, and the one place Luca's entire organization would be expected to show their legitimate face, The mole would be there. The night of the gala, Ellie felt like she was walking to her own execution. She wore a sapphire blue dress that left her shoulders bare, her hair pulled back in a way that made her look elegant and exposed. Around her wrist was a simple, diamond-encrusted bracelet, a gift from Luca. It was also a military-grade tracker, taped beneath the silk of her dress. Against her ribs was a wire. Luca was across the room, at a table with his uncle, Paolo. He looked rigid, his face carved from stone. He was playing the part of the grieving, angry husband, furious at the attack, but forced to keep up appearances. Ellie was alone. That was the plan. She was to stand at the bar, alone, looking shaken, looking available. Her heart hammered against the wire. Every man who looked at her made her skin crawl. She sipped a glass of water, her hand shaking so badly she nearly spilled it. A wife shouldn't be left alone on a night like this. The voice was familiar, smooth. She turned. Her blood ran cold. It was Marco, one of Luca's personal bodyguards, a man who had driven her to fittings, who had nodded respectfully to her 100 times. He was young, handsome, and always there. "Marco," she said, forcing a trembling smile. I'm just getting some air. It's a lot." "I can imagine," he said, his eyes filled with a counterfeit sympathy. He signaled the bartender. "The boss he's under a lot of pressure. He's not himself. He asked me to keep an eye on you, make sure you're safe." "That's very kind of you," she stammered. "He worries," Marco continued, leaning in conspiratorially. "He's paranoid, thinks everyone is a traitor. You must be terrified. All alone in that big house. He was playing her. He was testing her. He was painting Luca as unstable, and himself as the protector." The bartender placed a fresh cocktail on the bar. Marco picked it up, his back to her for a fraction of a second as he turned. His thumb, which held a large, gaudy ring, passed over the rim of the glass. "Here," he said, sliding it toward her. "Drink this. It'll calm your nerves." Ellie stared at the drink. It was a faint, pale green, but she saw it, a tiny, oily film swirling on the surface, already dissolving. He was drugging her, right here. In the open, he wasn't trying to talk. He was trying to take her. Her breath hitched. She looked at him, at his kind, false face. She whispered, so low it was just a breath against her dress. "Luca, it's Marco. He's drugging the drink. He's at the bar." Marco smiled. "Drink, Mrs. Bellante. You'll feel better." I don't..." "Drink it." His voice was no longer kind. It was a command, a hand large and heavy, slammed onto the bar, grabbing Marco's wrist, the one holding the ring. "She doesn't drink with traitors." "Luca." His voice was a low vibration of death. He wasn't in his suit from the table. He was in a black shirt, his face a mask of such cold fury that Marco, a trained killer, actually went pale. It happened in a second. Marco didn't panic. He was a professional. He used his other hand not to fight, but to shove Ellie. He threw her, hard, into Luca, using her as a shield to create distance. "Boss, it's not..." People screamed. The music stopped. Marco was pulling his weapon, the small, silenced pistol from his ankle holster. Luca roared, a sound of pure, primal rage. He shoved Ellie behind him, a violent, protective motion, drawing his own gun. But Marco was fast. He was desperate. He knew it was over. He fired. He wasn't aiming for Luca. He was aiming for the vulnerability. The bullet screamed past Luca's ear. Ellie felt a sudden, sharp, searing heat. A hot, burning line tore across the outside of her left arm. It was a shock, a sudden, electric pain that stole her breath. She cried out. That was all Luca heard. He didn't fire back. He didn't stop to aim. He launched himself, a 200-pound missile of muscle and rage. He tackled Marco over the bar. Glass shattered. Bottles exploded. There was the sickening, wet, heavy sound of a fist hitting bone. Once, twice. Luca's other men, the loyal ones, swarmed, guns out, forming a wall, screaming at the crowd. "Get down! Get down!" Ellie was leaning against a pillar, her hand clapped to her arm. The ballroom was a blur of shouting and screams. She looked down. Her hand. It was slick. The beautiful sapphire dress was turning a dark, wet black. It was blood, her blood. "Luca," she whispered, her voice lost in the chaos. He heard her. He turned, rising from the wreck of the bar. His hands were bloody. Marco was not moving. Luca's eyes, black and wild, scanned the room, found her. And he saw the blood, the rage, the control, the dawn. It all vanished. It was replaced by a cold, primal terror, a fear so naked it silenced the room. "No, no, no, no." He was at her side in an instant, his bloody hands hovering, afraid to touch her. "Ellie, you're hit. He shot you. It just burns," she said, but the words were slurred. The adrenaline was draining away, leaving a cold, dizzying hole in its place. Her knees buckled. He caught her. He scooped her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing. He didn't care about the cameras, the politicians, his uncle, his men. He held his wife, his blood-soaked, half-conscious wife, and walked straight through the center of the ballroom. He was carrying his own heart, and it was bleeding. She woke to the smell of antiseptic and concrete, the bunker. Her arm was bandaged, the graze clean and tightly wrapped. It throbbed, a dull, angry ache. She was in the cot, under a thin blanket. Luca was there. He was in a chair, but he'd fallen asleep slumped over, his head resting on the mattress by her waist, one hand still gripping hers. Even in sleep, he looked broken. His face was pale, his hair a mess. She saw his knuckles. They were split open and caked with dried blood. Not hers, Marco's. She slowly, wincingly, moved her good hand and touched his hair. He was awake in an instant, his head snapped up, his eyes wild, dark, and filled with a desperate, wrecked relief. "Ellie!" Her name was a prayer. He didn't kiss her. He didn't speak. He just surged forward, pulling her against him, cradling her head to his chest, his arms a vice around her. He was shaking. The invincible dawn was trembling, holding her like she was the only thing keeping him from falling apart. He buried his face in her hair, and she felt the dampness of his tears. "Don't ever do that again," he whispered, his voice thick and raw. "Don't you ever... I can't... I need you too much. I thought... God? Ellie? I thought I'd lost you. I thought he'd killed you." She held him with her good arm, her fingers gripping his shirt. She let him hold her, let him break, let him pour all the fear and rage and terror of the night into her shoulder. Finally, he pulled back, his hands coming up to frame her face, his eyes searching hers, as if to make sure she was real. She looked at this powerful, broken man who was terrified of a love he couldn't control. She cupped his face, her thumb brushing away a tear on his cheek. "Then stop keeping me in the dark," she said, her voice quiet but fierce. "Stop protecting me and start trusting me." His breath hitched. He stared at her, at the woman who had faced his enemy, who had taken a bullet and who was now comforting him. He crashed his mouth down on hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It was desperate, fierce, and almost violent in its passion. It was the taste of fear and blood and whiskey, and a love so potent it was an agony. It was the frantic kiss of a man who had seen his entire world go dark and had just been given it back. He kissed her like he was starving, like he was staking a claim, not on her body but on her soul. He pulled back, his breathing ragged, his forehead resting against hers. "From now on," Luca promised, his voice raw, his eyes locked on hers, his hand moved, his bloody, bruised fingers gently, reverently, covering her bandaged arm. "We're in this together, wife and husband, equal." Luca's promise, wife and husband equal, was not an empty one. It was a vow of war. Marco, the mole, had not been killed. He was, however, providing Luca with a wealth of information. The man was a traitor, but he was also a coward, and the sight of Luca's bloody knuckles had loosened his tongue with a speed that was almost impressive. They were still in the bunker. But now, it was not a prison. It was a war room. "Their main compound is not their main compound," Luca explained, his voice low and cold. He was pointing at a set of blueprints on the small concrete table. "It's a front. Paolo Sorrentino. He's old school. He's sentimental. He's running his entire operation out of the old cannery, by the docks. The one his father started. The one everyone thinks has been abandoned for 20 years, Ellie finished, her good hand tracing the lines on the map. Her arm throbbed, a dull reminder of the price of this information. He's hiding in plain sight. Exactly, Luca said, a dark admiration in his voice. Marco has given me the security rotations, the access points, the weak spots. He thinks he's buying his life. He's just delaying. The next night, the strike was planned. Luca was going, he was leading it. Ellie had not argued. She had not pleaded for him to stay. This was his world. This was his war. And now, it was hers. "I'm not staying here," she had said, her voice firm. "Ellie, you are not coming," he'd said, his voice final. "You're injured, and you are not a soldier." "I'm not going," she clarified. "I'm watching. You said equal. You said no more darkness. I will not sit in a concrete box, waiting to hear if my husband is dead or alive. I will watch, every second." He had stared at her. The woman with a bullet graze on her arm and steel in her spine. He'd finally nodded. "Fine. We'll set up a secure line. My man, Leo, will be running the tech. You will see what he sees." And so, she sat. Back in the main study of the fortified mansion, the one place she knew was secure, the house was empty, save for her and a handful of guards. The massive, dark wood desk was covered in monitors. Leo, a thin, nervous man with fast fingers, was manning the comms. Ellie's eyes were fixed on the main screen. It was a feed from a tactical drone high above the cannery, bathing the scene in a ghostly, green-black light. She saw small, green figures moving. Luca's team. "Alpha team in position at the north gate," Leo murmured, his voice professional, but she could hear the tremor. Ellie's heart was a cold stone in her chest. She watched as the figures breached the gate, silent as ghosts. Then the screen split, body cams. The world dissolved into chaos, shouts, muffled gunfire. It was not a movie. It was jerky. It was confusing. It was terrifying. "Boss is inside," Leo said, his fingers flying. "West corridor?" Ellie leaned forward, her hands gripping the desk, her knuckles white. She saw what Luca was seeing. The dark, wet hallways of a forgotten building. The smell of fish and rust so palpable she could almost taste it. "Contact! Left!" a voice screamed on the feed. Luca's camera spun. A man appeared. Luca fired. The man dropped. Ellie clapped a hand over her mouth. A strangled sob caught in her throat. This was the man who kissed her neck. This was the man who held her when she had nightmares. And he was. A killer. "Ellie," Leo said, his voice soft. "Don't," she commanded, her voice a harsh whisper. "Don't stop. Keep the feed on him." She watched, her entire body shaking, as Luca and his men moved through the building, a deadly, efficient machine. They were clearing rooms, taking prisoners, dismantling an empire in a matter of minutes. "Where is Paolo?" Luca's voice came over the comms, cold and commanding. "Office, top floor." The camera feed lurched as Luca took the stairs, 2 at a time. He kicked open a door, and there he was. Paolo Sorrentino, an old man, in a bathrobe, holding a glass of wine. He looked disappointed. "Luca," he said, as if greeting him for dinner. "You've been busy." "It's over, Paolo," Luca said, his gun steady. "Is it?" Sorrentino smiled, a sad, thin-lipped expression. "You think this ends it? You think my family just stops? You're a fool, boy, just like your brother." Ellie's breath caught. "You should have taken the deal," Paolo said, taking a sip of wine. "Married my Angelina. A good, strong alliance. Instead, you chose that whore from the street." Luca's camera twitched. "She's weak." "Luca," Paolo taunted, "just like your brother's girl. And we would have gotten her. Sooner or later, we would have." "She's not weak." Luca's voice was a low growl. "She's my wife." "She's a target," Paolo roared, slamming the glass down. "And you've painted it on her back." And then he moved. He wasn't reaching for a gun. He was reaching for a button under his desk. A shot, not from Luca, from the doorway. Another man, Sorrentino's own bodyguard. The bodyguard fired, aiming at Luca. "Luca!" Ellie screamed at the monitor. A useless, terrified cry. The camera feed went black. "Leo, Leo, what happened?" she shrieked, grabbing his arm. "Comms are dead. The feed. It's cut." Leo was white, his hands shaking. "I don't know." The silence in the study was a deafening, suffocating thing. Ellie stared at the black screen. Her heart stopped. He was gone. He was in a gutter, just like his brother. All because of her. She couldn't breathe. The room was spinning. The screen flickered, a grainy, black and white image, static, and then his face. Luca. He was holding the camera, his face filling the screen. He was covered in sweat and grime. There was blood on his cheek. But he was breathing. He was alive. "It's done. Ellie," he said, his voice ragged, exhausted. "It's done." He wasn't speaking to his men. He was speaking to her. "I'm coming home." The feed cut. Ellie collapsed back into the chair. The sobs she had been holding back for an hour finally racking her body. He was alive. He was alive. The Sorrentino family, as a threat, was dismantled. The war was over. Peace returned to the house. But Ellie was not peaceful. The image of Luca killing that man. The sound of the gunshot that had almost taken his life. The taunts from Paolo Sorrentino. They played in her head on a loop. She's weak. She's a target. She had been strong in the bunker. She had been strong at the gala. But watching the reality of his world, the cold, hard, bloody cost of it, had broken something in her. She began to pull away. It was subtle at first. She moved back into her old room, telling Luca she needed space, that her arm was keeping her from sleeping well. He let her, his eyes dark and worried, but he was so consumed with cleaning up the mess of the Sorrentino organization that he let her go. She stopped going to the study. She stopped asking questions. He would find her, late at night, staring out the window, her arms wrapped around herself. He would try to touch her, and she would flinch, not from him, but from the blood she imagined was still on his hands. "Ellie, talk to me," he would plead, his voice rough. "I'm just tired," she would whisper. She felt like a fraud. She wasn't strong. She was a girl from South Philly who had been playing dress-up as a Don's wife. She was the waitress. She was the weakness. And one day, her presence here, her love for him, would get him killed. He had almost died because of her. She wasn't strong enough for this world. She wasn't strong enough to watch the man she loved walk into the fire again and again and not be consumed by it. One night, she made her decision. It was the hardest, most painful thing she had ever done. It was the only, she felt, right thing she had ever done. It was pouring rain. The sound of it, lashing against the armored windows, masked the sound of her own quiet sobs. She wrote a note. Her hand was shaking, but her words were clear. "Luca, you were right. I am your weakness, and I love you too much to be the reason you end up in a gutter. I'm not strong enough. I'm not enough for you, for this. Don't come for me, please. This is the only way I know how to protect you. I'm sorry, Ellie." She left the note on his pillow. The pillow where the knife had been. She took nothing. Not the clothes, not the jewels, not the money. She put on the simple pair of jeans and the thin sweater she had arrived in, which Sophia had kindly washed and kept for her. She slipped out the back. The guards knew her. They let her pass. She was just Ellie, going for a walk. She walked for miles, in the cold, driving rain, until she was off the estate, until she was on a main road. She walked until she found it. A bus station, a lifeline, a way back to the invisibility she had known her whole life. She bought a ticket, one way, to nowhere. She just needed to disappear. She sat on the cold, plastic bench, soaked to the bone, shivering, her heart a hollow, aching void. She had done it. She'd saved him. The doors to the station slid open. She didn't look up. It was just another traveler. "Do you know," a voice said, low and rough, and so full of pain it cracked, "how hard it is to run an organization? When your wife has taken your heart with her?" Ellie's head snapped up. Luca. He was standing there. Wasn't the dawn, and he was a wreck. He was soaked, his black hair plastered to his skull, his thin shirt clinging to his chest. He was breathing like he'd run all the way here. His eyes were shattered. He was holding her note in his hand. "This," he said, his voice trembling, "this is not protection. Ellie, this is a death sentence. You are killing me. I had to," she whispered, tears streaming down her face, mixing with the rain. "Don't you see, he was right. Paolo was right. They'll never stop. They'll use me. I'll get you killed. Luca, I'm not enough." He crossed the distance between them. The bus station was empty, save for the two of them. The fluorescent lights hummed, the rain hammered on the roof, and he knelt. In the middle of the dirty, wet floor, Luca Bellante, the most feared man in Philadelphia, knelt at her feet. He didn't grab her, he just knelt. He looked up at her, his face a raw, open wound of love and desperation. "You gave me peace," he whispered, his voice hoarse. You walked into my life, a life that was all darkness and blood and duty. It was all survival, Ellie. Every day, just surviving. And you made me want to live." He was crying. Tears were cutting through the rain on his face. "You are not my weakness," he said, his voice breaking. "You are my everything. You are everything I never knew I needed. You are my conscience. You are my home. You are my life." He took her hand, the one that wasn't holding the bus ticket. He was shaking. He placed it, palm down, flat against his chest, against his heart. It was hammering, a frantic, desperate bird against her skin. "You belong here," he breathed, pressing her hand tighter. "Not in my house, not in my kitchen. Here, with me. You belong here. Not because you serve me, not because you are my staff, or my wife, or my property." He locked his eyes on hers, a final, desperate plea. "Because you love me, and I love you, and without you, there is no me to protect." She broke. A sob tore from her, a sound of such profound, agonizing relief that it brought her to her knees, too. She fell off the bench, into his arms, her face buried in his neck. "I love you," she wept, her words muffled against his skin. "I was so scared. I saw you. I thought—" "Shh," he whispered, his arms crushing her to him, holding her as if he would never, ever let her go. "I know, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you." He held her, in the middle of a dirty bus station, in the pouring rain, and for the first time, they were not a boss and his assistant, not a Don and his wife. They were just Luca and Ellie, emotionally healed, home. 3 weeks later, the sun was streaming into the main kitchen of the mansion. It was a bright, peaceful morning. The war was over, the house was quiet. Ellie stood at the massive marble island. In front of her was a bowl, a box of pancake mix, a carton of eggs, and a look of fierce, profound concentration on her face. She was, for the first time in her life, trying to cook. She was not doing it because Luca had asked. She was not doing it because she was supposed to. She was doing it because she wanted to surprise him. She wanted to make him something with her own hands. She was also, currently, making a spectacular mess. Flour dusted her nose. A piece of eggshell was floating in the bowl. She was so focused, she didn't hear him come in. He was quiet, as always. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, just watching her. A slow, unguarded smile touched his lips. He was in a pair of soft gray sweatpants and a t-shirt, his hair a mess from sleep. He looked peaceful. He crossed the room, his footsteps silent on the stone. She yelped when his arm slid around her waist from behind, pulling her back against his warm, solid chest. "You're concentrating too hard," he murmured, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "I'm trying," she said, leaning her head back against his shoulder. "I'm trying to be domestic. I'm making you breakfast. I can see that," he said, his lips brushing the sensitive skin of her neck. She shivered. "I can also see the eggshells. It's a work in progress." She laughed, tilting her head to give him better access. His hand splayed across her stomach, holding her close. He kissed her neck, a slow, warm, possessive kiss that had nothing to do with command and everything to do with belonging. "Still don't care if you burn them," he whispered, his voice thick with a quiet, mourning passion. He turned her in his arms, his dark eyes soft, his love for her so plain, so evident. It stole her breath. "You're my wife," he said, his voice dropping to that intimate growl she loved. "Not my cook." She smiled. "Good, because I think I already ruined them." "Good," he said, and he lowered his head and kissed her. It was not the desperate, claiming kiss of their past. It was not the kiss of fear or war or passion. It was a kiss of peace. It was slow and deep and sure. It tasted of coffee and morning, and a future they had almost lost in the bright sunlit kitchen, surrounded by the mess of her first attempt at pancakes. They were, at last, simply home. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I truly hope you enjoyed it. Where in the world are you listening from? I would love for you to comment and let me know. If you love stories like this, please be sure to subscribe to Mafia romance stories so you never miss a new chapter. And finally, what were your thoughts on Ellie and Luca? Share your thoughts in the comments below, in English. I cannot wait to read them.